The explosion tore through the night sky like a wounded beast screaming its last breath. Captain Elena Volkov felt the ground shake beneath her boots as flames erupted from the military compound 300 meters away. She was perched on a crumbling rooftop, her rifle steady against her shoulder, her breathing controlled despite the chaos unfolding below. The mission had been simple on paper: provide overwatch for General Marcus Kane's convoy as it passed through the hostile territory of Karvistan, a war-torn region where rebel forces controlled more ground than the government cared to admit. Elena had been doing this work for 8 years now, ever since she left her small village in the Ural Mountains to join the military. She was known in certain circles as the Silent Shadow, a nickname she never asked for but had earned through countless successful operations. But tonight, everything had gone wrong. The convoy had been ambushed 2 kilometers from the extraction point. Elena had eliminated 4 insurgents from her position, her shots precise and deadly, each one buying precious seconds for the convoy to maneuver. Then came the rocket-propelled grenade that struck the lead vehicle, followed by the massive explosion that seemed to swallow the entire street in fire and smoke. Through her scope, Elena watched as soldiers scattered like ants, some dragging wounded comrades, others returning fire blindly into the darkness. She picked off 2 more targets, her hands moving with mechanical efficiency, but her mind was racing. Where was the general? His armored vehicle had been third in line, but now she couldn't locate it through the smoke and flames. Her radio crackled with static and panicked voices. Overwatch, do you have eyes on Hawk Leader? Repeat, do you have visual on Hawk Leader? The voice belonged to Lieutenant Chen, the convoy's second in command. Elena pressed her throat mic. Negative. Heavy smoke obscuring visual. Last known position compromised. Hawk Leader is not responding to comms. Vehicle 3 is empty. Repeat, Vehicle 3 is empty. The word sent ice through Elena's veins. General Kane was missing. A man who held critical intelligence about enemy positions, supply routes, and planned operations was now somewhere in this hellscape. Possibly wounded, possibly captured, possibly dead. All units, fall back to Rally Point Beta, Chen's voice commanded. Overwatch, maintain position and provide covering fire. Elena watched through her scope as the remaining soldiers began their tactical retreat. She dropped 3 more insurgents who tried to pursue them, her rifle's suppressor keeping her position hidden. But her mind wasn't on the retreating soldiers. It was on the General. Marcus Kane wasn't just another officer. He had served with her father decades ago, back when the old wars were being fought. When her father died in combat, Kane had personally ensured that Elena and her mother received his full benefits and pension. He had written letters, made phone calls, and even visited their remote village once. He told Elena stories about her father's bravery, gave her his medals, and treated her not with pity but with respect. Years later, when Elena joined the military against her mother's wishes, Kane had been her commanding officer during basic training. He saw something in her, a steadiness and patience that others overlooked. He recommended her for sniper training, and she had excelled beyond anyone's expectations. Now that man was missing in enemy territory. The radio chatter continued. Overwatch, begin exfil procedures. Chopper will extract you from designated LZ in 15 minutes. Elena remained silent, her eye still pressed to her scope. The fires below were beginning to die down, revealing the carnage. Bodies lay scattered across the street, both friendly and hostile. Burned vehicles smoked in the darkness, and somewhere in that mess was General Kane. Overwatch, confirm receipt of last transmission, Chen's voice insisted. Elena made her decision. Negative on exfil command. I'm going after Hawk Leader. The radio exploded with protests. Overwatch, you are ordered to extract. The area is hot. Reinforcements are 12 hours out. You cannot. She switched off her radio. Elena began breaking down her sniper rifle with practiced efficiency, separating it into components that fit into her pack. She pulled out her secondary weapon, a compact carbine better suited for close-quarters combat. She checked her ammunition, her medical kit, and her survival gear. Everything she needed to survive behind enemy lines. The rooftop access was a rusted ladder that groaned under her weight. She descended quickly, her movements silent despite the gear she carried. The streets were darker now, lit only by the dying fires and the pale moon overhead. She could hear voices in the distance speaking in the local dialect. The insurgents were regrouping, searching for survivors to capture or intelligence to gather. Elena moved like a ghost through the shadows, using every piece of cover, every dark corner. Her training had prepared her for this. She had studied urban warfare, escape and evasion, survival tactics. But training and reality were different beasts. She reached the destroyed convoy in minutes. The smell hit her first, burning rubber and fuel mixed with something worse. She pushed it from her mind and began her search. The first vehicle was a total loss, its occupants clearly killed in the initial blast. The second had been abandoned, equipment scattered around it. The third vehicle, General Kane's armored transport, was on its side, smoke still rising from its engine. The doors were open, and blood trailed away from it into a nearby alley. Elena's heart raced. Blood meant he had been alive, at least initially. The trail meant he had moved or been moved. She followed the blood trail, her carbine raised, her senses heightened. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every sound could signal danger. The trail led through the alley, past rubble and debris, and ended at a collapsed building's entrance. Elena paused, listening. She heard nothing except the distant voices of insurgents and the crackling of fires. She activated her night vision device and peered into the darkness of the building. The blood trail continued inside, disappearing into the ruins. She took a deep breath and entered, knowing that once she crossed this threshold, there would be no turning back. She was committed now, committed to finding General Kane or dying in the attempt. Behind her the night continued its chaos, but ahead in the darkness lay her mission, and perhaps her fate. The collapsed building smelled of old concrete and decay. Elena's night vision turned the darkness into shades of green as she moved through the debris-filled corridor. The blood trail was clearer now, fresh drops that glistened against the dusty floor. Someone had come through here recently, and from the amount of blood they were seriously injured. She heard a sound ahead, a faint groan that barely registered over the distant gunfire outside. Elena froze, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. The sound came again, definitely human, definitely in pain. She moved forward cautiously, clearing each corner with the precision her training had drilled into her. The corridor opened into what had once been a lobby of some kind. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and a partially collapsed ceiling created pockets of shadow even her night vision struggled to penetrate. In the far corner, slumped against a wall, was General Kane. He was barely conscious, his uniform torn and bloodied. His left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. A piece of shrapnel protruded from his shoulder, and blood soaked through his tactical vest. But he was alive, and his eyes flickered open as Elena approached. "Captain Volkov," he whispered, his voice rough with pain. "You should have extracted. And leave you here? Not a chance, sir." Elena knelt beside him, quickly assessing his injuries. The leg was bad but survivable. The shrapnel in his shoulder was concerning, close to major arteries. He had other wounds, cuts and bruises, but nothing immediately life-threatening if she could stop the bleeding. She pulled out her medical kit and began working. Kane gritted his teeth as she injected him with morphine and started packing his wounds. "The convoy?" he asked. "Made it out. You're the only one unaccounted for." She worked quickly, efficiently, her hands steady despite the situation. "Can you walk?" Kane tried to move his injured leg and gasped in pain. No, not on this. Elena had expected as much. She pulled out a collapsible splint from her kit and began immobilizing his leg. The general watched her work, his eyes clearer now as the morphine took effect. "They'll be searching for survivors," he said. "American general would be a valuable prize for them, which is why we need to move now." Elena finished with the splint and helped Kane into a sitting position. "There's a safe house 2 kilometers north. If we can reach it before dawn, we can hold out until extraction. 2 kilometers might as well be 200 with this leg." Kane's voice was pragmatic, not defeatist. He was assessing their situation just as she was. "You should leave me, Captain. Get yourself out while you can." Elena looked at him directly. "With respect, sir, that's not going to happen. You didn't leave my father behind, and I'm not leaving you." Something passed across Kane's face, a mixture of pride and sadness. "Your father would be proud of you, Elena, but he'd also want you to survive. Then he'd want me to make sure you survive too." She stood and moved to the broken window, scanning the street outside. Dawn was still hours away, but she could see flashlights moving in the distance. The insurgents were conducting a systematic search of the area. She returned to Kane and pulled a small tablet from her pack. The screen glowed softly as she brought up a satellite map of the area. We have two options. The direct route through the streets is faster but more exposed. The alternate route through the sewers and maintenance tunnels is slower but provides better cover. Kane studied the map. The tunnels. We'll need the cover more than the speed. Elena nodded. She had hoped he would say that. She helped Kane to his feet, or rather his one good foot. He leaned heavily on her, and she could feel the tremor in his body from the pain and shock. The morphine was helping, but it could only do so much. They moved slowly through the building, Elena supporting most of Kane's weight. Every few meters they had to stop so he could catch his breath. She kept her carbine in her free hand, ready for any threat. The building's rear exit led into an alley that was darker and more concealed than the front. There should be a maintenance access 50 meters east, Kane said, his breathing labored. Old city infrastructure. Most of these buildings were connected by utility tunnels back when this was a thriving city. Elena had studied the city's layout before the mission, but Kane's knowledge was more detailed. He had operated in this region for years and knew its secrets better than any map could show. They moved through the alley, sticking to the shadows. Twice they had to stop and hide as insurgent patrols passed nearby. Elena's heart pounded each time, her hand tight on her weapon. But the darkness and rubble provided enough concealment. The maintenance access was exactly where Kane said it would be, a heavy metal grate partially obscured by debris. Elena cleared away the rubble as quietly as possible and pulled the grate open. The smell that wafted up was unpleasant but not unbearable. Old sewers and forgotten tunnels, but they represented safety and concealment. Getting Kane down the ladder was the hardest part. She went first, guiding his good leg onto each rung while he used his arms to lower himself. Every movement caused him pain, evident in the way his jaw clenched and his breathing became shallow. But he didn't cry out, didn't make a sound that might alert their enemies. The tunnel below was cramped and dark, the ceiling barely high enough to stand upright. Water trickled somewhere in the distance, and the air was stale and thick. Elena activated a small red-filtered flashlight, the dim glow enough to see by without ruining her night vision. North by northeast, Kane said, pointing down one of the tunnel branches. Should connect to the old industrial sector eventually. They moved through the tunnel, Elena supporting Kane, both of them moving as quickly as his injury would allow. Time became meaningless in the darkness. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The only sounds were their breathing, the drip of water, and the occasional distant rumble from above as vehicles passed on the streets overhead. Elena's mind worked constantly, planning their next moves, calculating distances, estimating the time until dawn. They needed to cover 2 kilometers through these tunnels, find the safe house and secure it before daylight brought renewed searching by the insurgents. Kane stumbled, and Elena caught him before he fell. "Sorry," he muttered. "Getting weaker." The morphine's wearing off. Elena checked her watch. They had been moving for almost an hour. "We need to stop and let you rest." "No time for that." Kane straightened himself with effort. "Keep moving. I'll manage," but Elena could see he was fading. The blood loss, the pain, the shock, all of it was taking its toll. She made a decision. 5 minutes. You need 5 minutes to recover some strength or you won't make it another kilometer. Kane wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. They found a wider section of tunnel where an old maintenance room branched off. Elena helped him sit, then gave him water and a protein bar from her pack. While he ate, she checked their position on her tablet. "We're about halfway there," she reported. "Another hour at our current pace," Kane nodded, chewing slowly. "What's your extraction plan, Captain?" "The safe house has communications equipment. Once we're secure, I'll contact command and arrange for aerial extraction. Assuming the equipment still works. Assuming the safe house hasn't been compromised." Kane wasn't being pessimistic, just realistic. "And assuming command can get assets in place before the insurgents find us." "A lot of assumptions," Elena admitted. "But it's the best option we have." Kane finished the protein bar and took another drink of water. "You know, when I recommended you for sniper training, I saw something special in you. Patience, precision, determination. But I never expected this level of loyalty. You helped my family when we had nothing. This is me repaying that debt." "There's no debt, Elena. What I did was basic human decency, which makes it more valuable than you realize, sir." She helped him to his feet again. "Ready to move?" Kane tested his weight on his good leg and nodded. "Let's finish this." They continued through the tunnels, the darkness pressing in around them. the unknown stretching ahead. Somewhere above, the insurgents were still searching, still hunting for the missing general. But down here, in the forgotten veins of a dying city, a solitary sniper and her wounded commander pushed forward, refusing to surrender to the chaos that had consumed the night above them. The tunnel seemed endless. Elena's shoulders ached from supporting General Kane's weight, and sweat soaked through her tactical gear despite the cool underground air. Kane's breathing had become more labored, each step a visible effort that he tried to hide but couldn't completely mask. They had been moving for another 40 minutes when Elena noticed something that made her stop. Fresh air. It was faint, but distinct from the stale atmosphere of the tunnels. It carried with it the smell of smoke and cordite from the battle above. "There's an opening ahead," she said quietly. "Could be our exit point or could be a breach in the tunnel system." Kane nodded, too exhausted to speak. Elena helped him lean against the tunnel wall while she moved forward to investigate. The carbine felt heavy in her hands as she advanced, every sense alert for danger. The source of the fresh air was a collapsed section of tunnel, where the ceiling had partially caved in. Rubble filled most of the passage, but there was enough space to climb through if they were careful. More importantly, Elena could see through the gaps that they were near street level, in what looked like a basement of another destroyed building. She returned to Kane. "We need to go up. The tunnel's blocked ahead anyway." Getting him through the collapsed section was brutal work. Elena had to clear rocks and debris while supporting his weight, all while trying to remain quiet. Every scrape of stone against stone made her wince, certain it would alert someone above. But no one came. They emerged into a basement that had once been some kind of storage facility. Empty shelves lined the walls and broken crates littered the floor. A stairway led up to ground level, but Elena could see light filtering down from above. Dawn was approaching, earlier than she had hoped. "We need to move fast," she said, checking her tablet. "The safe house is 3 blocks north. Once the sun comes up, our chances of reaching it undetected drop significantly." Kane straightened himself with effort. "Then we don't waste time talking about it." They climbed the stairs carefully. Elena went first, her weapon ready, clearing each step before allowing Kane to follow. At the top was a doorway that opened into the ground floor of what had been a commercial building. Shattered glass covered the floor, and the walls were pockmarked with bullet holes from previous fighting. Through the broken windows, Elena could see the street outside. The fires from the convoy attack had died down, but smoke still drifted through the air. More concerning were the voices she could hear, closer now than before. The insurgents were expanding their search pattern. She pulled Kane back from the window. "We'll have to move during the transition period. Right now it's too dark for them to see well without lights, but light enough that they'll spot flashlights easily. It's making them cautious, which works for us." 3 blocks, Kane said. "Which route?" Elena studied the street layout through the window. Parallel to the main road using the side alleys. More cover, less chance of running into patrols. They waited for a patrol to pass. 4 men moving in a loose formation, their attention focused on the buildings across the street. When they turned the corner, Elena and Kane moved. The first block was agonizing. Every shadow seemed to hold enemies. Every sound made Elena's finger tighten on her trigger. Kane hobbled beside her, using her as a crutch, his injured leg dragging slightly despite his best efforts. They moved from doorway to doorway, using every piece of cover the destroyed city offered. Halfway through the second block, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching. Elena pulled Kane into a recessed doorway as 2 pickup trucks rolled past, their beds filled with armed insurgents. One of them was shouting orders, coordinating the search. They were getting organized, which meant their window of opportunity was closing fast. "We need to pick up the pace," Elena said once the trucks passed. "I'm slowing you down," Kane replied, and there was frustration in his voice. Not at her, but at his own limitations. "You're keeping up just fine, sir. Now let's move." The third block presented a new problem. The safe house was on the far side of an open square, about 50 meters of exposed ground. In the growing light, crossing it would make them visible to anyone watching from the surrounding buildings. Elena studied the square carefully. There was a fountain in the center, long, dry, and partially destroyed. If they could reach it, they could use it as cover for the second half of the crossing, but that first 25 meters would leave them completely exposed. "We wait for a distraction," Kane suggested, reading her thoughts. They didn't have to wait long. Somewhere to the east, gunfire erupted. Not the sporadic shooting they had been hearing all night, but sustained automatic weapons fire. Someone was engaging the insurgents, possibly a reconnaissance team or local resistance fighters. "That's our chance," Elena said. "When I say go, we move fast." She helped Kane position himself, taking as much of his weight as she could. The gunfire intensified, and she heard shouting from multiple directions as insurgents moved toward the fighting. "Go!" They burst from cover and moved across the square. Kane hopped on his good leg, using Elena as a living crutch, both of them moving faster than seemed possible given his injury. 20 meters, 15, 10. The fountain loomed ahead. A shout came from their left. Someone had spotted them. Elena heard the distinctive sound of an AK-47 being charged. She pushed Kane behind the fountain and spun, her carbine coming up smoothly. 2 insurgents were running toward them from a side street, weapons raised. Elena fired twice. Both insurgents dropped. She fired again, suppressing a third fighter who appeared behind them. Then she was moving, pulling Kane up, dragging him toward the safe house entrance. More shouts filled the air. Their presence was known now. The element of surprise was gone. It was a race against time. The safe house was a nondescript 3-story building that looked like every other destroyed structure around it. But Elena knew from her briefing that it had reinforced doors, secure communications, and enough supplies to last a week if necessary. The door was locked with a keypad. Elena punched in the code with shaking fingers while Kane covered their rear with a pistol he had drawn from his holster. The lock clicked and the door swung open. They stumbled inside and Elena immediately secured the entrance. The door was solid steel disguised to look like wood, and once locked from the inside, it would take explosives to breach. She threw the bolts and activated the security bar. Bullets impacted the door seconds later, a sustained burst that accomplished nothing against the reinforced barrier. Elena heard angry voices outside, orders being shouted. They would try to find another way in, but the safe house had been designed to withstand exactly this kind of situation. Kane had collapsed against the wall, his face pale, his breathing rapid. "Made it," he gasped. "Barely, but we made it." Elena was already moving through the ground floor, checking windows and alternate entrances. Everything was secure. She returned to Kane and helped him to a chair. "We're safe for now. Let me check your wounds." The movement across the square had reopened some of his injuries. Blood seeped through the bandages on his shoulder. Elena worked quickly, replacing the dressings and administering another dose of morphine. Kane's color improved slightly as the pain medication took effect. "Communications equipment?" he asked. "Upstairs. I'll check it once you're stabilized." She finished bandaging his shoulder and moved to his leg. The splint had held, but the limb was swollen and discolored. He needed real medical attention soon. Outside, the sound of vehicles arriving announced the arrival of more insurgents. They were surrounding the building, setting up a perimeter. Elena moved to a window and carefully peered out through a small gap in the reinforced shutters. At least 20 fighters were visible, with more arriving by the minute. "We've got company," she reported. "They're setting up for a siege." Kane nodded, unsurprised. "Then we better hope that communications equipment works. Otherwise, this safe house becomes our tomb." Elena left him on the ground floor and climbed the stairs to the second level. The communications room was exactly where the briefing documents had indicated, a small reinforced space with satellite equipment and a backup power system. She activated the console and waited as it powered up. The equipment was old but functional. She entered her authentication codes and established a secure connection with Command. The response was immediate. "Overwatch, this is Command. We've been trying to reach you for hours. What is your status?" Elena keyed the microphone. "Command, this is Overwatch. I have Hawk Leader secured in Safe House Delta 7. He requires immediate medical evacuation, multiple serious injuries. We are currently under siege by insurgent forces. Estimated 20+ fighters with more arriving." There was a pause on the other end. "Copy that, Overwatch. Stand by for extraction options." The pause stretched into a full minute. Elena watched the console, her heart sinking as the silence continued. Finally, the radio crackled to life again. "Overwatch, Command. We have a problem." Elena's grip tightened on the microphone. Those 4 words carried a weight that made her stomach drop. "Command, specify the problem." The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Hayes, the operation commander. "The situation has deteriorated rapidly in the last 6 hours. Insurgent forces have moved heavy anti-aircraft weapons into your sector. We've already lost one reconnaissance drone to ground fire. Helicopter extraction is not viable until we can suppress those weapons. Timeline on suppression? Elena kept her voice steady, professional even as her mind raced through implications. 12 hours minimum. Strike aircraft are being redirected from another operation. But they need time to reach the area and conduct preliminary reconnaissance. The anti-aircraft positions are mobile and well concealed. 12 hours. Elena looked out through the reinforced window at the gathering insurgent forces. 12 hours was an eternity under these conditions. Command. General Kane's medical condition is serious. He may not have 12 hours. Another pause. When Hayes spoke again, his voice was heavy. I understand that, Captain. We're working on alternatives. There's a possibility of a ground extraction using local assets, but that's not confirmed yet.
Can you hold the position?
Elena assessed their situation. The safe house had supplies, ammunition, and defensive positions. But they were only 2 people, and one of them was critically injured. We can hold, sir. How many hostiles are we looking at? Intelligence estimates between 30 and 50 fighters in your immediate area, with reinforcements likely. They know they have an American general cornered. This is a propaganda victory they'll fight hard to secure. Understood. Overwatch will maintain position and await extraction. Out. Elena descended the stairs to where Kane waited. He read the expression on her face immediately. Complications? 12 hours minimum for aerial extraction. They're working on alternatives. She sat down across from him, pulling out her tablet to review their defensive options. We need to prepare for a sustained defense. Kane nodded slowly. They'll probe our defenses first. Test for weaknesses. Once they understand our capabilities, they'll either try to overwhelm us with numbers or settle in for a siege. The safe house has enough supplies for a week. We can outlast them if necessary. Unless they decide to bring in heavy weapons. RPGs, mortars, even explosives to breach the walls. Kane shifted in his chair, wincing at the pain. We need to make them believe we have more defenders than we actually do. Create uncertainty about our strength. Elena understood his thinking. Multiple firing positions, varied response patterns. Make it seem like there are 4 or 5 of us instead of 2. Exactly. Kane managed a weak smile. You were always a quick study, Captain. Over the next hour, Elena prepared their defenses. The safe house had been designed with exactly this scenario in mind. There were firing ports on all 3 levels, reinforced positions that provided cover while allowing clear fields of fire. She distributed their ammunition strategically, setting up caches at different positions so she could move between them quickly. The first probe came just after full sunrise. 3 insurgents approached the building from the east, moving cautiously, weapons raised. Elena watched them through a second-floor firing port, letting them get close. When they were 10 meters from the door, she fired a single shot that dropped the lead fighter. Immediately, she moved to a first-floor position and fired twice more, forcing the other 2 to retreat. She heard shouting outside, orders being given in the local dialect. They were coordinating, preparing for a more serious assault. Elena used the brief respite to check on Kane. He was pale but alert, his pistol resting on his lap. How many? He asked. 3 in the probe, 40 or 50 in the surrounding area. She refilled her water bottle from the safe house supplies. They're being cautious. Testing us. Good. Caution means respect. Respect means they'll move slowly. Kane gestured to the window. They'll try to surround us completely, cut off any possibility of escape. Then they'll wait for orders from their leadership on how to proceed. He was right. Over the next 2 hours, Elena watched as insurgents established positions in buildings around the square. They were creating a perimeter, ensuring that even if reinforcements arrived, they would face a prepared defense. It was a smart tactic, but it also meant the insurgents were committing significant forces to this single location. The next assault came from multiple directions simultaneously. Automatic weapons fire raked the safe house from 3 different positions, while a team of 6 fighters rushed the front entrance. Elena had anticipated this. She moved through the building with practiced efficiency, firing from different positions, creating the illusion of multiple defenders. She dropped 2 of the rushing fighters from the 3rd floor, then relocated to the 1st floor and eliminated another before they reached the door. The suppressing fire intensified, but the reinforced walls held. After 2 minutes of sustained fire, the insurgents pulled back, leaving 3 bodies in the square. Elena's radio crackled. Overwatch, this is command. We're receiving reports of heavy fighting at your location.
Status? 2 assaults repelled.
No casualties on our side. Ammunition at 80%. Elena reloaded her carbine as she spoke. They're testing our defenses. Next assault will be more coordinated. Copy that. Be advised we're working on a ground extraction option. Stand by for details. Ground extraction meant local forces, probably contractors or friendly militia. It was risky, but better than waiting 12 hours for aerial assets. Elena acknowledged and returned her attention to Kane. His condition had worsened. The morphine was wearing off again and she was running low on doses. His skin had a gray pallor and his breathing was shallow. Blood loss and shock were taking their toll. She administered another partial dose, trying to conserve their limited supply. Talk to me, sir. Keep your mind active. She checked his pulse as she spoke. It was weak, but steady. Kane forced his eyes to focus on her. Did I ever tell you about the time your father and I got trapped in a snowstorm in the Caucasus Mountains? Elena had heard the story before, but she knew he needed to talk, needed to stay conscious. Tell me again. As Kane recounted the story, his voice weak but determined, Elena maintained her watch on the surrounding area. The insurgents were regrouping, preparing for another assault. She could see them moving equipment, setting up what looked like a heavy machine gun position. The afternoon assault was the most serious yet. The heavy machine gun opened fire, its larger caliber rounds punching holes in the safe house's reinforced shutters. Under that covering fire, a dozen fighters advanced from multiple directions. They moved with more discipline than before, using proper cover and fire techniques. Elena was everywhere at once, moving between positions, firing controlled bursts, forcing the attackers to take cover. She was burning through ammunition now, but conserving it meant being overrun. The assault lasted 10 minutes before the insurgents fell back again, leaving 4 more casualties. But Elena had taken a hit. A ricochet had caught her left arm, a grazing wound that burned like fire. She bound it quickly with supplies from her medical kit and returned to Kane. His eyes were closed, but he was breathing. Resting, conserving his strength, the radio crackled again. Overwatch command. Ground extraction is confirmed. Friendly forces will approach your position at 2300 hours. Be prepared for immediate evacuation. Elena checked her watch. 6 more hours. They had to hold for 6 more hours. Copy that command. We'll be ready. She moved through the safe house, taking inventory. Ammunition was down to 50%. Medical supplies were critically low. Water was adequate, but food was irrelevant given their situation. She could hold for 6 hours. She had to. As evening approached, the insurgent forces changed tactics. Instead of assaulting, they began systematic harassment fire. Every few minutes, a burst of automatic weapons would rake the building, keeping Elena pinned down, preventing rest. It was a war of attrition now, wearing her down mentally and physically. Kane regained consciousness as darkness fell. Status? He asked weakly. Extraction at 2300. 3 hours. Elena gave him water, helping him drink. Ground forces will approach from the north. We need to be ready to move quickly. Can I move? Elena looked at his injured leg. The swelling had increased, and she knew the pain must be excruciating even with the morphine. We'll make it work. For the next 2 hours, Elena maintained their defense while preparing for evacuation. She packed their essential gear, creating a kit she could carry while supporting Kane. She studied the extraction route on her tablet, memorizing every turn, every potential danger point. At 22:30, her radio came to life. Overwatch, this is Reaper Team. We're approaching your position from the north. Heavy contact with hostile forces. Add it to your location 15 minutes. Be ready to move on our signal. Copy, Reaper Team. Standing by. Elena helped Kane to his feet and supported him as they moved to the first floor, positioning themselves near the rear exit. Outside, the sound of gunfire intensified. The extraction team was fighting their way in, and the insurgents were responding in force. Almost over, Elena told Kane. Just a little longer. Kane gripped his pistol with a determination that belied his condition. You saved my life tonight, Captain. I won't forge you inside. The explosion that rocked the northern perimeter was so powerful that dust rained from the safe house ceiling. Elena steadied Kane against the wall as the building shook. Through the reinforced windows, she could see tracers cutting through the darkness like deadly fireflies. The extraction team was making their presence known in a violent and unmistakable way. Her radio erupted with chatter. Overwatch, Reaper Team leader. We're breaching the insurgent perimeter now. Prepare for extraction in 5 minutes. North exit, acknowledge. North exit confirmed, Reaper. Standing by. Elena's heart hammered as she double-checked their gear. Everything they needed was in her pack. Kane's arm was around her shoulders, his weight pressing down but manageable. His breathing was labored but steady. The gunfire outside reached a crescendo. She could hear the distinct sound of American weapons now, the sharper crack of M4 rifles mixing with the duller thud of AK-47s. Grenades detonated in rapid succession, their flashes visible through the cracks in the shutters. Reaper team wasn't being subtle. They were creating maximum chaos to cover the extraction. 2 minutes, came the voice over the radio. Get ready to move fast. We've got heavy resistance and limited time before they reorganize. Elena positioned Kane at the rear door, her carbine held ready in her free hand. She had maybe 30 rounds left. Enough for one more fight if it came to that. She prayed it wouldn't. A massive explosion lit up the night closer than the others. The heavy machine gun position that had been harassing them all day was gone, taken out by what sounded like a rocket launcher. The insurgent fire slackened noticeably as fighters scrambled to respond to the new threat. Overwatch north door now. Elena threw the bolts and kicked the door open. The alley behind the safe house was dark and filled with smoke. 3 figures in tactical gear materialized from the darkness, weapons raised and scanning for threats. American contractors, heavily armed and professional. We've got you, ma'am. Let's move. The lead contractor, a muscular man with a thick beard, gestured urgently. Another contractor immediately moved to help with Kane, taking his weight from Elena's shoulders. They moved as a group through the alley. 2 contractors ahead, 1 behind, with Elena and Kane in the middle. The sounds of battle raged around them but seemed distant, muffled by the adrenaline coursing through Elena's system. They turned a corner and nearly ran into an insurgent patrol. The contractors reacted instantly. Suppressed weapons coughed quietly, and 3 insurgents dropped before they could raise an alarm. The team kept moving, stepping over the bodies without breaking stride. This was what they did, Elena realized. This was routine for them. They reached a side street where 2 armored vehicles waited, engines running, doors open. The contractors practically threw Kane into the first vehicle, while Elena climbed in behind him. The doors slammed shut and they were moving before she even had her seatbelt fastened. Reaper 2, this is Reaper lead. Package secure. X filling now. Lay down suppression and fall back to rally point. The vehicle accelerated hard, throwing Elena back in her seat. Through the reinforced windows, she could see muzzle flashes as the remaining contractors provided covering fire. The second vehicle fell in behind them, and they were racing through the dark streets of the destroyed city. Insurgent fighters appeared at intersections, firing wildly at the passing vehicles. Bullets pinged off the armor, but the vehicles were built to withstand small arms fire. The driver never slowed, taking corners at speeds that would have been suicidal in any other circumstance. 3 minutes to extraction point, the lead contractor announced. He turned to look at Kane. How's the general? Alive. Kane answered for himself, his voice weak but determined. Thanks to Captain Volkov here. Ma'am, you've got some serious skills, the contractor said to Elena with genuine respect. Word is you held off 50 hostiles for 12 hours with just you and the general. I was motivated, Elena replied simply. They burst out of the city limits and onto a dirt road. In the distance, Elena could see lights. The extraction point. A small airfield that had once served the city before the war turned it into a wasteland. Now it was a staging area for operations in the region. The vehicles raced across the open ground, and Elena could see the silhouette of a helicopter on the tarmac, rotors already spinning. Medical personnel waited near it with a stretcher. They had made it. Against all odds, through an entire day and night of hell, they had actually made it. The vehicles screeched to a halt beside the helicopter. Doors flew open and hands reached in to help. The medical team took over immediately, easing Kane onto the stretcher with practiced efficiency. Elena stumbled out behind them, her legs suddenly weak as the adrenaline began to fade. A medic grabbed her arm. You're injured, ma'am. Let me look at that. Elena glanced down at her left arm, almost having forgotten about the ricochet wound. Blood had soaked through the bandage. It's fine. Take care of the general first. We've got him, ma'am. Now let me see that arm. She let the medic guide her to the helicopter. Inside, another medical team was already working on Kane, starting IVs, checking vital signs. doing all the things that would keep him alive until they reached a proper hospital. He looked small and vulnerable on the stretcher, so different from the commanding presence she had always known. His eyes found hers across the crowded helicopter interior. He tried to speak, but an oxygen mask was being placed over his face. Elena saw his hand move, a weak gesture that she understood. "Thank you," she nodded back. No words were necessary. The helicopter lifted off and Elena watched through the open door as the extraction point fell away below them. The burning city was visible in the distance, a scar of light against the darkness. Somewhere down there, insurgents were cursing the loss of their prize. Somewhere down there, the battle continued. But up here in this helicopter racing through the night sky, 2 soldiers were heading home, battered, bloodied, but alive. The medic finished bandaging Elena's arm and handed her a bottle of water. She drank it in long gulps, not realizing how thirsty she had been. Her hands shook slightly as she lowered the bottle, the first visible sign of the stress she had been under. Colonel Hayes's voice came through a headset the crew chief handed her. "Captain Volkov, this is command. Outstanding work. You saved General Kane's life and demonstrated exceptional courage under fire. When you're ready, we'll need a full debrief, but for now, just focus on getting back safely." "Thank you, sir." Elena's voice was hoarse. "Request permission to stay with General Kane until he's stable." "Granted. You've earned it, Captain." Elena looked over at Kane again. The medical team had stabilized him, and his color was better than it had been in hours. One of the medics gave her a thumbs up. He would make it. The next few days would be critical. Surgery would be needed, recovery would take months, but he would survive. She leaned back against the helicopter's frame and closed her eyes for just a moment. The thump of the rotors was almost soothing after the chaos of the past day. She had gone into that hellscape alone, determined to bring her general home, and she had done it. The helicopter banked, heading east toward the main base. Below, the landscape was a patchwork of darkness and scattered lights. Somewhere down there, her sniper rifle was still hidden in her original position, probably never to be recovered. She had left it behind when she made the decision to go after Kane. A piece of expensive equipment sacrificed without hesitation, but equipment could be replaced. People couldn't. Elena opened her eyes and looked at the soldiers around her. The medical team working on Kane with dedicated focus. The crew chief monitoring their flight path. The door gunner scanning for threats even though they were well away from the danger zone. These were her people. This was her purpose. She had been a sniper because she was good at it, because she had the patience and precision required. But tonight she had been something more. She had been a soldier who refused to leave anyone behind, a person who honored old debts and chose loyalty over safety. Her father would have been proud. Kane had been right about that. The flight took 40 minutes. They landed at a large forward operating base where an ambulance waited to rush Kane to the base hospital. Elena followed, refusing to leave his side until the doctors took over. She stood outside the operating room, still in her blood-stained tactical gear, and waited. Hours passed. Other soldiers came and went, some recognizing her, word having already spread about the rescue. A few offered congratulations, others just nodded with respect. Elena barely noticed. Her focus was on that operating room door. Finally, a surgeon emerged. "Captain Volkov? General Kane is stable. The surgery went well. He'll need additional procedures and significant recovery time, but he's going to make a full recovery." Elena felt something release in her chest, a tension she hadn't even realized she was holding. "Can I see him?" "Briefly." He's sedated but conscious. The recovery room was quiet and sterile, so different from the chaos they had endured together. Kane lay in a hospital bed, cleaned up, properly bandaged with various monitors beeping softly around him. His eyes opened as Elena approached. "Captain," he whispered, his voice thick from the anesthesia. "You should be resting. So should you, sir." Elena pulled up a chair beside his bed. "Doctor says you'll make a full recovery. Thanks to you." Kane's hand moved. 3 weeks had passed since that chaotic night in Karvistan. Elena stood in the administrative building at the main military base, wearing her dress uniform instead of the tactical gear that had become like a second skin. The ribbons and medals on her chest felt strange and heavy, especially the new one that Colonel Hayes had just pinned there during a private ceremony, the Silver Star, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. The citation read like something from a movie, not like something she had actually lived through. But the scar on her left arm and the images that still woke her some nights proved it had all been real. General Kane stood beside her, leaning on a cane but otherwise looking remarkably recovered. The doctors had performed 3 surgeries to repair the damage to his leg and shoulder, and while he faced months of physical therapy, his prognosis was excellent. More importantly, the intelligence he carried had been successfully delivered to command, leading to a major operation that had disrupted insurgent supply lines across the entire region. "Captain Volkov," Colonel Hayes said, shaking her hand firmly, "what you accomplished was extraordinary. The entire chain of command has taken notice. There are people in Washington who want to meet you." Elena shifted uncomfortably. She had never been good with attention or praise. "I was just doing my job, sir." "That's what all the real heroes say," Kane interjected with a slight smile. "But what you did went far beyond duty, and you know it." The ceremony concluded and the small group of officers dispersed. Elena found herself alone with Kane in the hallway, a moment of quiet in the midst of military bustle. "Walk with me," Kane suggested, gesturing with his cane. "Doctor says I need to stay mobile." They walked slowly through the base past soldiers going about their daily routines. Some saluted as they passed, recognizing the general. A few nodded to Elena, word of her actions having spread through the ranks in the way stories always did in the military. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few weeks," Kane said as they walked. "About that night, about what it means, about what comes next." Elena remained quiet, letting him speak at his own pace. "You saved my life, Elena, not just by pulling me out of that building or holding off those insurgents. You saved me by refusing to accept that I was expendable, by deciding that one man's life was worth risking your own." Kane stopped walking and turned to face her. "Do you know how rare that is? Real loyalty? The kind that isn't about following orders or protocol, but about genuine human connection? You did the same for my family when my father died. You weren't ordered to help us. You chose to, and you remembered. After all these years, you remembered." Kane's eyes were bright with emotion. "That's the kind of soldier, the kind of person, that this military needs. Not just someone who can shoot straight or follow orders, but someone who understands that we fight for each other as much as for any cause or country." They resumed walking, passing by the training grounds where new recruits were going through drills. Elena watched them, remembering her own days as a trainee, young and uncertain, trying to prove herself in a world that didn't always believe a woman from a small village could become an elite sniper. "I've recommended you for promotion," Kane continued. "Major Volkov has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Elena stopped walking. "Sir, I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I'm ready for—" "You held off 50 insurgents for 12 hours, evacuated a critically wounded officer through hostile territory, and coordinated your own extraction under fire. If you're not ready for increased responsibility, then no one is." Kane's voice was firm but kind. "Besides, it's not just about you anymore. Your story is spreading. Young soldiers, especially young women, are seeing what you accomplished. You're inspiring people, Elena. That's worth more than any tactical victory." The thought made Elena uncomfortable. She had never wanted to be an inspiration or a symbol. She just wanted to do her job well and help her fellow soldiers. But she understood what Kane was saying. Sometimes the meaning of our actions extends beyond our intentions. "I'll consider it, sir," she said finally. "Good. Because I'm also recommending you for the Special Operations Command. They need people with your skills and your judgment. The war is changing, Elena. It's becoming more about small teams conducting precision operations than large-scale battles. Your experience makes you perfect for that evolution. Special operations, the most elite units in the military." Elena had never imagined herself in that world, but as Kane described it, she could see the appeal. Smaller teams meant greater autonomy, more responsibility, and the chance to make real differences in critical situations. They reached the base chapel, a quiet building set apart from the main structures. Kane gestured to a bench outside and they sat. The sun was warm, and a light breeze carried the smell of diesel fuel and dust, the permanent scent of any military base. "Can I ask you something personal?" Kane said after a moment of silence. "Of course, sir. Why did you really come after me? And don't give me the line about repaying a debt. I know there was more to it than that." Elena considered the question carefully. She had asked herself the same thing many times over the past 3 weeks. "When I was on that rooftop and heard you were missing, I had a choice. Follow orders and extract or go find you. The logical choice was extraction. The odds of finding you alive, getting you out, surviving the whole thing, they were all terrible. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But then I thought about what kind of person I wanted to be. Not what kind of soldier, but what kind of person. And I realized that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. You had helped my family when we needed it most. You had believed in me when others didn't. How could I be the person I wanted to be if I abandoned you when you needed help? Kane nodded slowly. That's a better answer than I expected. Most people would have said something about duty or honor, but you made it about character, about who you are at your core. That's wisdom beyond your years, Captain. My father used to say that character is what you do when no one is watching and nothing is forcing you. That night, no one was watching me make that decision. No one was forcing me to go after you, so it revealed something about my character, I suppose. Your father was a wise man, and he raised a daughter who embodies that wisdom. Kane stood, testing his weight on the injured leg. It held, though he still kept the cane for support. I'm being transferred back to Washington for the rest of my recovery, and then a new assignment at the Pentagon. But I want you to know that whatever happens in your career, wherever you end up, you have an advocate, someone who will always remember what you did and what it meant. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. They walked back toward the administrative building in comfortable silence. The base was getting busier as the day progressed. Soldiers moving with purpose, vehicles coming and going, helicopters taking off and landing. The machinery of war never stopped, Elena reflected. Even in moments of peace, preparations continued for the next conflict, the next mission, the next crisis. At the building entrance, Kane stopped and extended his hand. Take care of yourself, Elena. The world needs more soldiers like you. Elena shook his hand firmly. Recover well, sir. And thank you for everything. Not just these past few weeks, but for everything you did for my family, for believing in me, for being the kind of leader worth following. Kane smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. The honor has been mine, Captain. Truly. He turned and walked into the building, his cane tapping against the floor with each step. Elena watched him go, then turned to look out over the base. Somewhere out there, another mission was being planned. Another crisis was developing. Another soldier might need help, and Elena would be ready. She walked across the base toward her quarters, passing by the sniper range where she had spent countless hours honing her skills. On impulse, she decided to stop. The range master, a gruff sergeant named Williams, looked up as she approached. Captain Volkov, heard about what you did out there. Hell of a thing. Just another day, Sergeant Williams. Elena picked up one of the training rifles and checked it with practiced efficiency. Mind if I shoot a few rounds? Need to stay sharp? Range is all yours, ma'am. Show these youngsters what real shooting looks like. Elena set up at the 500-meter line and settled into position. The rifle felt natural in her hands, an extension of her will. She controlled her breathing, found her sight picture, and began to shoot. Each round found its mark, clustered tightly in the center of the target. A small group of soldiers had gathered to watch, including some of the young recruits she had seen training earlier. They were silent, focused on her technique, learning from observation. Elena was aware of them but didn't let it affect her shooting. This was what she did. This was who she was. After 30 rounds, she cleared the weapon and stood. The soldiers gave her a spontaneous round of applause, which she acknowledged with a brief nod. She returned the rifle to Williams and started to leave. Captain Volkov, a young woman barely 20, stepped forward nervously. I just wanted to say you're the reason I joined the military. I read about female snipers and decided I wanted to be like them. Like you. Elena looked at the young soldier, seeing something of herself years ago. Uncertain, determined, hoping to prove hers.